Have you here, and my name is Magda Brown. I was born and raised in Hungary, and many times when I talk to school children, I pull out my 8th grade graduation picture, and not to show off how I look like then, but to make you understand, the children should should understand that I wasn't any different than the youngsters here today. So what happens when the pendulum swings and the happy-go-lucky child raised in a nice religious family, the whole life turns upside down. So how did it all happen? Germany had a ruler in 1933 on called Hitler, and he had many strange ideas, to say it mildly. He wanted to create the perfect race, and therefore he didn't like many people. He discriminated against the Jehovah's Witnesses. He didn't like the Catholic priests, but most fervently he disliked the Jewish people. And he and his followers created many anti-Jewish laws. And from 1933 to 1939, the Nazi Party was gaining momentum and preparing for the Second World War. So now we are reaching 1939, and the Nazi army occupies many European countries. Once they go into a country, let me go backwards for a minute. The German military had the Wehrmacht. These were the regular soldiers serving the country. But then there were these Nazi-trained soldiers whose job was exclusively how to deal with the final solution. These Nazi men were trained step by step, the whole procedures that I will describe to you in more details. So now, Germany is trying to occupy many Eastern European countries, but I live in Hungary. So for the time being, like from 1939 to 1944, they go into many other countries in Europe, and thus the killing machine begins as far as the Jewish people and the Gypsies and the Jehovah's Witnesses goes. But we are in Hungary, and the Hungarian region keeps German help out, because they offer to come and help, whatever. But eventually, on March 19, 1944, this special Nazi group enters Hungary, and within less than a very short time, in about 10 days, we are given the orders for having this Jewish Star of David sewn onto their clothing. Without that, we were not permitted to go out on the street. But this is nothing. Once they entered the country in March of 1944, the orders came. All the Jewish people will be congregated in a ghetto. And for the young people, in America, we understand the word ghetto means that an ethnic group decides to settle in a community. But thank God, they can move anywhere their heart desires. However, in real life, once they created this ghetto, that all the Jewish people from the farm areas or suburban areas were moved into the big city, where they allocated a section. Once the people were moved in here with their little overnight bag, and matter of fact, this was the biggest lie of the 20th century. The people in the suburbs were told that pack about a 3-day provision because you're going to go to another country to help. I mean, this is wartime, so they needed help. So what a clever ploy to keep the people calm. After all, we go help with a factory or whatever, fine. Not realizing that that meant to the gas chambers. So now, on my 17th birthday, June 11, 1944, This is when you walk up later and look at it. These are cattle cars, actual, authentic German cattle cars, which you can see at the Illinois Holocaust Museum. These are regular, ordinary cattle cars that you use to transport animals. Now, if you look inside the empty cattle car, you see a space. Maybe if you were to put these 3 tables in the length, the flat tables over there, and another set of tables parallel to it. That was the empty cattle car. Inside, they had 2 buckets. One bucket had water in it, and one bucket for toiletries. Now, you would visualize the amount of people occupying that much space. In your mind, you would think, oh, maybe 30 people. 35 in that individual bag to sit on the wooden floor. Ladies and gentlemen, they shoved 75 to 80 people in that space. There was standing room only in order to let my mother sit in front of me. To sit. I stood for 3 solid days in this boxcar. Now, the important thing here is that bucket of water was gone within the first hour. It was never, ever refilled for 3 solid days. You cannot fathom what thirst is. I always say that you can have emotional illness, you can have physical illness, it disappears. The only thing you can focus on, if I could only have a sip of water. That is the most treacherous torture imaginable. So now we are in this crowded cattle car, traveling to the unknown very slowly. Because you have to remember, this is the height of the war, so the military trains are occupying the first set of railroad tracks. So sometimes they just push us on back to the back of the railroad yard until there is an open road to continue traveling. Nevertheless, after 3 days, we stop, get out of these cars, and they start separating people. The men this way, and the women and children this way. So the men this way, and actually my father, my uncles, or any of the male members from my family are separated in this column, and that's the last time I ever see them. On this side, we are ordered to line up 5 abreast and start walking up to a distance and to this courtyard. And then we have to stop because a group of Nazi officers are facing us. And, you know, when they say stop, you stop. You see, you have to remember one important thing here. You are no longer a human being. 99% of us in that column spoke fluent German, okay? But they do not speak to you, you are nothing but an animal, and they just point at you. So now my very young-looking mother, who was 42, but very young-looking, is holding on to me. That was the first indication to separate us. So my mother is going this way, and I'm going that way. Now remember, there's a lot of chaos here. And I waved to my mother, "Mother, I'll see you later." Unfortunately, later never comes. Now I am just moving along. From this location, they put us into an empty room, and from the adjacent room, there are some girls coming out, but screaming from the top of their lungs. We couldn't imagine what's happening, but they looked so strange. What took place in the adjacent room, they shaved our head bald and all our body hair. So you really had to look at your best friend in her eyes and listen to the voice to recognize her until we got acclimated to this strangeness. Now, you know, there are a lot of young girls here too. What is the most precious thing for a young girl? Fixing her hair. We weren't any different either. I mean, that's how it is. So now, they shaved our hair, and then Of course, the clothing we came in, they just said, in this room, fold it up, put it on the floor, you will get it later. We have never ever seen any clothing and shoes that we came in. So now we have this so-called shower. It was nothing more than a room, maybe half the size of this room, and about 50 shower heads were in the ceiling, and literally a trickle of water was reaching your dirty, smelly body. There was no soap, there was no towel, none of that. And from here they gave us an ill-fitting uniform. For shoes, they took away our shoes, and we ended up with flip-flops with wooden soles. It is the most excruciating thing to learn to walk in it, because it has a leather band across it, and that's all that holds up your foot. So now, I mean, we really look comical in an ironic way. So now that we were washed and dressed and polished, they put us into a room, maybe a tad bigger than this, 500 of us. And I tell you, I call the Holocaust a methodically created, scientifically arranged killing machine, because everything was precisely done. So, in this room, they laid us down on the floor, 500 of us, like sardines in the can. And you know, there were no pillows, so the flip-flops we had was our pillow, and the body heat next to you was the warm. At the crack of dawn, out into the bitter cold yard. After all, it's already June, but in the crack of dawn it is cold. And we had these thin clothes on. And then we had to stand in line, 5 abreast, and then each unit who was housed in this room had like an old-time prisoner as a supervisor, so that she would start counting us. Not once, sometimes 2 times, 3 times, and you had to stand erect like a soldier. Some of our colleagues were getting pretty sick. There was no such a thing as a medicine. I mean, it's unheard of about it. So, what we improvised, we were 5 abreast. So there's 2 here and 2 here, and we put the sick one in the middle, because she could drop dead, but she had to stand in line to be counted. And to this day, after 73 years later, I still cannot imagine the necessity of being counted. We were imprisoned with electrified barbed wires surrounding the camp. So you touched it, you're dead, right? We looked unrecognizable. Now where in heaven's name we could have escaped to this day, I don't know. But we were counted and counted and counted. Once this counting took place in the morning, then came what you don't call food. It was a green liquid with some unidentifiable stuff floating in it, and we had no utensils, no silverware, none of that. It just had a little bowl, and they poured this liquid in. That was some green liquid, only God knows what was floating in it. The first day we got this, it smelled so bad that we just turned it away. I mean, we didn't realize that this will become our steady diet. Unfortunately, the people said, you better eat it or you will not get anything else. So this was for morning, and in the evening, they gave us a tiny crust of black bread. It was, sawdust was put in there or something, because it was unbelievable. And one night we would have like you get in the restaurant, that pat of butter, that kind of, some kind of margarine. And maybe another night there would be like a ringlet of little sausage made out of dogs or whatever, horses or cattle. And this was our diet. So we are in Auschwitz, Birkenau at this point. And as we are there for about a week or 2, something like that, we asked the old-timers, could you please tell us when we're going to see our relatives who went dead away? Inevitably, these people would raise their hands and point to the 5 chimneys. Now we saw those chimneys spewing out heavy black smoke. And it was an odor, the best way I can describe to you. When you kill a chicken and you put it over a flame to remove the feather, that's the kind of odor we kept smelling. But who had time to analyze what that is? So anyhow, we are there for a while and asked the old-timers, would you tell us how soon we're going to reconnect with the family? They pointed to these chimneys and said, that's where your parents are. Now, we are in the 20th century. The world has modernized. You can't even imagine people being killed alive. You know, we are talking about ancient times of manslaughter. So we were in denial for a while. You know, you just don't want to believe it. But eventually, as time progressed, we had to realize the truth. It was very hard. Remember, I'm altogether 17 years old. I'm all alone. And fortunately, I made friends with 3 older sisters. So they kind of mentored me and watched over me. But, you know, that's I tell the young people that, you know, they have all kinds of funny ideas about life and hard and difficult and too fat and too skinny and all that. I said, you know, I don't wish it on anybody to go through that kind of a torture. But from 17 years on, I have made executive decisions, whether they were good or a mistake, but there wasn't a mother there to advise me otherwise. So, now we are in Auschwitz proper, and they had what they called a selection. Now the selection meant in the open courtyard, you had to go outside and walk around in circles. You had to disrobe halfway, and I guarantee you they were not looking for our physical beauty, but they were seeing how strong our upper arms are. So they started selecting 2 columns. One column, which I got into, fortunately, that was shipped out of Auschwitz, and the other one, only God knows their fate. So, now, very rapidly, they get us organized, and that is the reason I do not have a tattoo on my arm with the numbers, because they pulled me out of Auschwitz proper faster. That is where they used to label the people. So now we got put back on the train again, and we end up in Germany, in the general vicinity of Frankfurt, Marburg, Kassel area. And there they had an ammunition factory manufacturing rockets and bombs. Now we are 1,000 Hungarian women. And they divided us into 2 500 units. So 1 500 would be working at night shift, 1 500 would be working day shift. So interestingly, how cleverly that factory was built. We walked into the building, down. The roof was flat, it was sodded, so when the US reconnaissance planes were searching areas, they saw nothing more than a meadow. But we were right there. So this was, like I said, it's a 12-hour shift, extremely hard work. I happened to work at 2 different places, but the one of them was where through the building there were pipes, and that carried highly poisonous liquid material that would go inside the bomb. So the bomb was standing in front of your workbench, and through this pipeline you have to insert the liquid material, lock it, and then 2 people have to lift it to a warehouse location because it was that heavy. So time is marching by, and about the 5th or 6th month into it, our crew cut begins to show. Our hair starts growing out. And now we look at our hair, and if your hair was black, now it's orange, your face is lemon yellow, and your lips are deep dark purple. what has taken place? By working with this highly poisonous material, it started invading our body. But thank the Lord, over and over again, the end was nearing. Otherwise, I wouldn't have the pleasure of talking to you. So, by the end of March, they evacuated the campsite, and they put us on what they call death march, because the Allies were nearing. So now, we were marching on an open freeway during the day, with very little food, and sleeping in the cold, wet ditches on the roadway. This took place for 3 miserable days. It was one of the coldest marches I will never want to remember. On the 3rd day, a miracle happens. 2 things happen. We are approaching a village area, and the village, that wheat fields, or some kind of fields, you know. So at this farmland, we are looking around, and somehow there were less Nazi women guards here than when we started out. I assume, I do not have the fact, but I assume these women were looking out for their lives, not to be captured by the Allies. So I guess they just vanished. So came the miracle. At this farmland, we look out, and in about 2-3 city blocks away, there is a barn. And we look, and now comes fantasy big time. Because I keep telling you, we lived in faith and fantasy, and determination to survive, because you have no idea how much you want to live. So, look at each other, and here comes, like I said, fantasy big time. We start, a group of us. How would it be if during the night we crawl on our stomach and reach the barn? You see, by this time our self-esteem was 0. So what? They find us, they kill us, it all will be over. The God and I have a very good connection. He comes to my rescue all the time. And I had many events in my life, ups and downs, and here I am. So, nevertheless, we negotiated this journey to the barn, and of course, shaking in our boots, what will be next. And all of a sudden, through the little peephole the next day, we look through, and 2 young men are approaching, but they wear a strange uniform we have never seen. But these were our darling 2 U.S. soldiers, God bless them for risking their lives to save ours, and they were our liberators. Now these were like 19-year-old boys. So the boys were crying as much as we were crying, but nevertheless, things have changed. So now the captains got into the negotiating stages with the German families in their villages. So each family had to allocate 1 room to give us a bed and some food and so forth. So this was a beginning of our liberation. And then many unique things happened in this time frame between April and about August. In the interim, one of the chaplain from the military was interviewing us, and he said, among many things, he said, "Could you tell me if you have any relatives around the world?" Well, I remembered that my father had 2 brothers and a sister who emigrated to Chicago in 1908. Now the only thing I knew was their name and Chicago. These beautiful people, and the chaplain, submitted this information to the Hebrew Emigrant Society in New York. And by me giving this much information, and here again, God bless every single volunteer, because they have a mission to fulfill. These volunteers kept calling Chicago till they connected with my relatives, and through the steps, my relatives were elated, because for years they haven't heard anything from the family, and they pooled their little money together, and made the arrangements, and with God's help, I made it to Chicago, September 1946. So, I arrived from slavery to freedom. Now here comes a little chapter that I want to share with you. You know, there's so much issue about immigration. America used to be called, the streets are paved with gold in Europe. That's how America, which I still believe it is. So, I got here, and I was lucky enough, with God's help, I ended up with the uncles, both of them having a daughter my age. So when you're not quite 19 years old, and you have a girl, even though speaking a different language, but your own age, so my Americanization went much faster than other survivors or refugees. So with that in mind, my aunts were wonderful to me, and they took me to a children family service social worker in contact. So what to do with me, you know? I'm already almost 19 years old, and so the social worker interviewed me, and she said, you know, I got a job for you in a Jewish organization's office. Now for the young people, we didn't have the computers to make thousands of envelopes to send out for mailing. It had to be typed up and prepared. So they got me a job in this organization to address envelopes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I knew every single zip code in Chicago by the time I was done with this. So I did this job for a whole year, and this office happened to be next door to the National Council of Jewish Women, who employed professional educators from the Board of Education to come for evening lessons, because there were a lot of highly educated emigres among these people. I was like the least educated. But nevertheless, so this teacher taught us not only English language, but civics, so when the time comes for getting your, what is it?
Citizenship.
No, when you become American citizen, what I think?
Citizenship.
Anyhow, okay. Citizenship, thank you. So they have prepared for the citizenship. So I just mentioned one more thing about the past, and then we'll talk happy talk. I am working in this office for about a year or whatever, and the family knew a Hungarian Jewish doctor who came to America right after the Depression. And he approached me and he said, how would you like to work in my office? I said, doctor, I know nothing. He said, I will teach you everything. Ladies and gentlemen, 40 years of togetherness taught me an awful lot. I became a certified medical assistant, but I learned even more than what you learn in school. And it was a beautiful friendship. All of a sudden I had a father, a mentor, a friend, so that lasted for a number of years. So this is how life, and of course in the interim I was lucky enough to find a nice American boy and marry and have, this is my daughter, and my son is somewhere in the audience. So my son is, oh, there you are. So, and of course they blessed me with children, and I'm a great-grandma now, so life is good. Now, when the pastor was touching upon the word reconciliation, I have to share something with you that happened about 5 years ago. I was invited to an annual Eucharistic Catholic convention in New Zealand. Now, you know, a Catholic convention, you would assume religious people are attending. And among them, after my talk, a nice-looking young man, about 22 years old, or 20 something, approaches me with the following remarks. After much talking, this is the watered-down version. And I'm as talkative as I am, that's how I was focused on every word this boy was saying. Well, short version. Both my grandfathers were Nazi officers. I would ask you to forgive them. Well, you need a God for that kind of answer, right? I told you he's in my corner. So I said, young man, in the Jewish religion, our holiest of holiday is the Day of Atonement. We fast, we pray, and among our prayers we ask God to forgive us as well as our perpetrators, so that you can rest assured that I have long forgiven your relatives. I could not have made this remark in the very early stages when my brain was not focused on anything else. I have forgiven everybody, and that's why when I speak, I emphasize, think before you hate. Now, I can't preach that unless I practice it, right? So, this is how it went, and this is where I am now, and I'm a happy person, and I share my stories strictly for educational levels, so that young people learn not to hate, protect their freedom. That's my other message. Next to our health, the most important commodity we have is freedom. So let's work everything within our power to maintain this forever and ever. So if there are any questions, I will, happy to answer. Otherwise, I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, I need an interpreter real fast. Pastor, come to my rescue. You see, I am losing my hearing, but I am in denial. I am in denial, but when I go home, I am getting the little stuff.
Okay, question.
Hi. Where were the rabbis when Hitler was in power?
Where were the rabbis? I could not tell you. I mean, probably in heaven already. But what has happened within my, we were all women there. And remarkable your upbringing, when you really learn that Bible from scratch, from the very basic. Now remember, I told you that I'm a young girl, okay? I remember what I have learned in Bible school and all that stuff, but not as much as some of the older women who came from ultra-religious families. It was the most miraculous thing how these women remembered without having a calendar, without having any paper. They knew when the Sabbath was. They knew when a holiday was. I don't have the answer for it, but somehow or another, now the only way we could gather to pray was behind the latrines. Those are the toilets. Because that was the only spot that they weren't watching us congregating. Otherwise, you couldn't just hang around and talk to your friends. Yes, okay. I need my pastor interpreter.
Yes, Ken.
Yeah, Magda, I've only met one other Holocaust survivor, and he was very bitter and very angry, and he struck back out at the world for all of his pain and suffering.
Well, duly so. Duly so. I mean, when you undergo that high degree of discrimination and poverty and every other phase of torture, it's very easy to have reconciliation. But like I said, I had many mentors, and I told you that I had faith. I still have faith. Matter of fact, I want to share one more thing with you. I am speaking at a middle school, and this darling little 12-year-old raises his hand. Okay, his remark. Said, I've been listening to your story, all the tragedies you had under the Nazis. Have you considered changing your religion? So I turned to the child and I said, my dear child, I have paid such a high price for being a Jew that now that I live in luxury, I have no intentions to change. I mean, there is nothing wrong with the child, because you have to learn when you buy the microphone, there are no stupid questions, right? So, I respected that, and I answered the child to the best of my abilities. It was a very good question from him. It was a very sweet question.
Ken?
Your follow-up on that, from your experience in knowing the community of survivors, what percentage of them would you say are still people of faith versus the bitterness that I experienced with Jack?
What was the last part?
So what percentage of people have kept the faith?
Have kept the faith versus being bitter?
But
Versus
I
being
cannot
bitter.
give you a percentage number, but the people I am affiliated with, survivors, they are churchgoers, let's put it in that word. I have kept my faith, not necessarily as good as my parents did, but pretty close to it. My children went to Hebrew school during their growing years, and I have celebrated every holiday. Matter of fact, when I felt better, I would have big dinners for Passover and other holidays. So my children have learned about religion, and that's how I was. What you raised with. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to ask you, you went through a time of great hate and intolerance, and if you can just talk about what your lesson is that you can share with us about what we might be facing today.
Can you share with us your lessons from recovering from your experience in light of today's, what's going on in today's world with...
Well, it's not a very fast recovery, okay? But I mentioned throughout my talk that I was fortunate of marrying an American-born young Jewish man. I have to emphasize that, because most of the survivors would marry another survivor. Now, besides love and raising children, there was one very important commodity here. My children grew up with a loving set of grandparents from my husband's side, and aunts and uncles and cousins. Whereas one survivor to the other, there's no back history. So to this day, we have very close contact with the family, and that's a great plus for the children. It made a big difference.
Good.
I'm going to walk up a little bit so we don't have to translate. You've talked about your walk with God and how He was always there with you and the many victories you've had. At what point in your life you moved away from that hate and contempt into a loving, forgiving person?
Well, let's give a little credit for my personality. I'm not bragging about it, but to answer his question. God blessed me with a positive attitude. So I try to go forward. And I call it from slavery to freedom, and not remembering the slavery. So I talk about it mainly to educate the young people about the genocide. So it runs parallel, okay? So the more they learn about this history, the more they will protect their freedom, the more cordial they will be among their friends instead of hating them. So all these things kind of intertwine. Yes.
I don't have a question. I just have to say something that you already know, that salvation is through the Jews. Salvation is through the Jews.
Well,
That's in our Bible.
it's a beautiful comment. We went through so many, the Jewish history goes back a long time. And we were up and down and sideways, but somehow God is watching over us, all of us, Yes, ma'am.
You said when we were in church that it doesn't begin quickly or overnight, that it begins slowly. The Holocaust begins slowly. Can you tell us how to be among our friends and neighbors as we see it beginning, or if we were to see it beginning?
Go ahead. Yeah.
No,
Do you
Go ahead. She
understand?
was saying about the neighbors.
Right, so we want to be polite to our friends and neighbors, yet we are wondering perhaps if our friends and neighbors are, as we see things change gradually, how do we
Everything,
do that?
it just happened. Such expediency, you know, once we were taken away, that it just disappeared. So I went back to Hungary post-war because I heard that my brother may be alive, which I'll touch upon in a minute. So I went back to a lovely Catholic lady who was employed by my father for many, many years and became like part of our family. And she was wonderful because when we were in the ghetto, she used to sneak in food for us and medicine, whatever we needed. And it was a very dangerous thing to do. So I met her post-war, and of course, I showered her with every gift I could possibly do. So, you know, this is again, I say that there are more good people than bad people. It just, some of the bad people don't listen. And you know what bothers me more than anything else about this past? The upcoming Holocaust deniers. Now, in this high-tech society, I'm not talking about 50 years ago or 100 years ago. I am talking about the high-tech world, when everything is on the internet. The whole world can't lie, all the survivors who remain. I mean, you can't lie. There are actual photos of Auschwitz and everything else with the touch of your finger. And they still come up, it was an invention. Now what do you do? So I preach and I tell the real story, so you can tell the other people, the one who doubted, the truth of the happenings. It's a very painful memory, and like I told you earlier, I have one friend who will not say a word, nothing out of her, you know, just goes on with life the best she can. You know, we're all getting up in age because I am 90 and I am among the youngest survivors. Because, you know, when they were separating us, 16-year-olds, up to 16-year-olds, never made it. So very rarely there would be maybe a 15-year-old who was maybe a tall girl or the roll of dice, you know, lucky. And so I do it the best I can. Matter of fact, the reason I have a back injury, I was flying to a university in Iowa to speak, and I fell and I broke 2 vertebrae and I had to have surgery. So that kind of set me back, but I keep going. Now that I have to use a walker, so at my age I can afford it.
That's
When you
great.
were going through,
Yes,
when you were
ma'am.
going through the trauma, did you think you were going to survive? Did you just go from day to day?
You're asking me what was going through my mind, will I survive? I told you this before and I'll repeat it. You have no idea how much you want to live.
Oh.
That's all you think, not that tomorrow I will die, but tomorrow will be a better day.
Really?
You have to have that. You have to have that faith, because otherwise, there were some who were giving up, who were, you know, really, truly couldn't handle it. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm better than the next one, but we all have different personalities, and we all respond differently. So, but then we try to encourage the other ones. You know, somehow you always find a mentor. I found these 3 sisters. They were my big sisters.
Yeah.
And they watched over me. And, you know, so many mysterious ways things can function.
Yeah. Thank you for
But anyhow,
sharing.
that's all.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yes, ma'am.
Yep.
I think what the other lady was asking was, what are the impending signs of genocide? What should the young people watch out for in the world so that this doesn't happen again?
Well, I said about the genocide, and to protect your freedom. And also, I repeatedly say that genocide does not happen from one minute to the next. You have to watch out of having your freedom taken away slowly, slowly, slowly. This law or that law. So that's why we're lucky we live in America, where they have good laws and protecting the people. Because once you lose your freedom, you have nothing. You can have a bundle of money somewhere, don't mean nothing. If you cannot function as a normal person,
Very,
That's
very
it.
difficult.
One more. How do you feel about Germany today?
oh, Germany today. That's my absolute favorite subject. Thank you for reminding me. Pastor spoke about reconciliation. Would you believe that I have a 30-year-old German boyfriend? So let me tell you that story, which is quite unique. Germany, about 50 years ago, the Church of Ascension in Germany, the management, the board of directors, started talking about how could we help disabled people, war-torn people in war-torn countries. It wasn't a Jewish issue, but these church people started to say, how can we do good to help people? So among them were some educators, and they came up with a brilliant idea. How would it be if we take high school graduates and train them for a couple of months? Now these are 18-year-old kids. How to interact with people in disabled, war-torn country, and so on. So about 30-some years ago, our Holocaust Museum heard about their existence. Because they would send out volunteers all over the world. These young kids, and they would be like under the supervision of the German consulate and so forth, so they were well taken care of. And anyhow, so our museum heard about it, and the management decided, how will we know how the survivor will interact with the German child if we don't try? So management decided, let's try it and see what happens. So, what happens here is a miracle. Now these are the darling young German children who are dedicated to do good. As it happens, I happen to live across the street from our little Holocaust Museum. So I would go across to speak to school children all the time, and I made friends with this darling 19-year-old boy named Gregor from Berlin. And my Gregor is like I said, my German boyfriend. So now he's 19 years old. And of course, the museum is like that building across there. So I tell him, I said, Gregor, when you have a break, walk across the street and you have refrigerator privileges. Yes, Coca-Cola, cookies. So thus a friendship develops. When in the term while he was in America, his parents come to visit him because it happened to be his 19th birthday. So I entertained the parents, and thus a very tight friendship developed. I want you, ladies and gentlemen, to know that every single holiday, I get a giant box of German homemade cakes and cookies and chocolate and cappuccino from the grandmother, from his grandmother. So the family adopted me. So, what am I talking about in my total speech? Think before you hate. So, I am the best friend with this child. I have reconciled of living with the past up to a point, but going forward, and I don't hate anybody.
That's beautiful.
Love.
Wow.
So that's how it goes. Anyhow, I truly thank you for your attention. I mean, there's a lot of chit-chatting here, but I appreciate you listening, and enjoy your lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.